rather sudden, I wasn't quite ready. Welcome everybody. The session is on a subject which generated a lot of royal pomp and ceremony a month or two ago, just before the fuss of a royal wedding and a royal birth. It's the Commonwealth, once known as the British Commonwealth and now the Commonwealth of Nations, firmly based in London, in Marlborough House on the Mall, just along from the string of royal palaces that finish up with Buckingham Palace, and carefully protected by the Queen, who ensured during CHOGM that her son will eventually take over as the head of the Commonwealth. I've led in with those royal connections, not only because it's the Queen's official birthday today and the High Commissioner has just come from Trooping the Colour, or watching the Trooping of the Colour if you weren't doing it yourself, and lunch at Downing Street too, which is one of the honours which I've just discovered that, that High Commissioners get. The ambassadors of other countries don't get lunch on Trooping of the Colour Day, but High Commissioners do. So I hope you enjoyed your lunch in Downing Street. And I've mentioned all that because a lot of people see the Commonwealth simply as a relic of former empire that achieves little and should, if not disbanded, which it won't be, should be allowed to fade away. But it's more than that. And while it's undoubtedly performing long way below its potential, it's valued by its many small members. There's over 30 of the 53 members are small states, and over 20, and I forget the exact figures, are islands, small island states. And I've discovered, in the months I've been writing about it since the middle of last year, how much those small states do value it. And it's significant, which shows its potential, that India, whose Prime Minister didn't manage to get to the previous CHOGMs, did come this time and did play a role. He was urged, and the Indian government was urged to play an increasing role in the Commonwealth, and in fact an increasing leading role. And that's what began to happen at CHOGM this year. So it's appropriate that we have the Indian High Commissioner, Mr. Y.K.Sinha, to speak to us for 4 minutes or 4.5 minutes before everybody else is invited up and we start the debate. So would you like to speak there, or would you like to go there? Okay.
Thank you, John, for that very brief introduction. I didn't have lunch at 10 Downing Street. I just had some drinks and snacks, but then I did go home, get out of my formal attire, and get into something more comfortable. Ladies and gentlemen, my fellow panelists, I'm delighted to be here as part of this Jaipur Literary Festival, I believe the 5th edition and the 2nd at the British Library. And we are discussing the Commonwealth of Nations, how appropriate. John told you why, because we had the front seats, we sat next to Her Majesty, and we were treated to a wonderful reception at 10 Downing Street. But that apart, I think the Commonwealth is much more than that. I must confess that India has not been a very enthusiastic member or participant in the Commonwealth for all these years, though don't forget that the Commonwealth of Nations that came into being in 1949, the January 1949 declaration, India played a very important role, and that is because our first Prime Minister, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, was instrumental in getting this organization the way it is today. Not the British Commonwealth, but the Commonwealth of Nations, of free, independent, sovereign countries. And most importantly, India was the first republic to join the Commonwealth. But having said that, I would like to focus more on what the Commonwealth stands for today. John referred to the membership. About 35, 36 countries are small developing states. There are about 20 odd, or more than 20, 26 or 27 small island states, and about 31 who are actually small vulnerable states. This out of the 53, these numbers tell you what the Commonwealth represents today. We often forget that because when we talk about the Commonwealth, we talk about those countries, the realm countries, or the ABC as they're known, and Australia, Britain, and Canada. But the Commonwealth is much more than the ABC countries. And I think this CHOGM was an opportunity for all of us, all member states, to try and see how we can move forward, not just go on the way we have. And the reason is that unless the Commonwealth, and I've written about this in April, I was asked to write an article for the House magazine in the British Parliament, and I did mention there that unless the Commonwealth reflects the aspirations of the majority of its member states, the Commonwealth, unfortunately, would not really live up to its true potential. And as you know, that most of these small, vulnerable states face problems. Problems in development, problems growth, problems of poverty elevation, problems of climate change, and so on. So I think unless the Commonwealth addresses these issues seriously, I'm afraid it will soon lose its relevance. And that is why I think this Commonwealth, this CHOGM, gave a particular focus to these issues. And I think it's important, not just India. Of course, India is more than half of the Commonwealth, but it's not just India. I think everyone needs to step up to the plate because it's something that all of us own. It may be headquartered at Marlborough House in London, but I think it's something that all of us own, and we should then ensure that it is a success. It has had a patchy record in the past, but that's not because countries are not interested, but because certain countries have tended to dominate the agenda. And I think it's important because, and I did write in this article, that we need to eschew a prescriptive approach and build a more collaborative approach. And I think look at these issues that really afflict the Commonwealth. I'm not in any way suggesting that the issues that the Commonwealth addresses are not important. They're extremely important. But there are a host of issues which are either not addressed adequately or swept under the carpet. And I would like, and since I know that John is very particular about time, I'd like to stress one particular point, and that is trade and investments. A recent study, they talked about how trade and investments in 2000 were 200 billion, and by 2016 had increased to 600 billion. And it's predicted that by 2020 it will go up to over 1 trillion. Investments, 700 million more. And India is the driving force. India is the fastest growing large economy in the world today, and the second largest economy in the Commonwealth, but not for too long. I think in the next year or so, India will overtake the United Kingdom as the fifth and then the sixth, the sixth, fifth, and then the fourth largest economy in a year's time. So I think trade and investment plays a very important role, and the growth in trade and investment that has taken place in the last few years is because of India. The last point that I'd like to make, apart from trade and investments, is development cooperation. It's extremely important for the majority of the member states. We have a CFTC, a Commonwealth Fund for Technical Cooperation, that needs to be revived. It's under-resourced, underfunded, and we have we've put money into it. We were contributing £1 billion a year. We've increased it to 2. And we've increased contributions to the Commonwealth Small States offices in New York and Geneva. We've set up a Commonwealth sub-window at the India-UN Development Fund based in New York. So we are committed to doing more with member states and for member states. Thank you.
You guys stick to the time limit?
Perfect timing. Can everybody else come up, please? Rita, why don't you go there next? Philip, can you come here? David there? Philip and David? Yes, whichever way. Yep, thanks. If you go down there, Rita. Let me now introduce our panel. On the right, we have Philip Murphy, whose new book, The Empire's New Clothes, The Myth of the Commonwealth, came out during the CHOGM week and created quite a stir. We have Lord Howell, David Howell, a former Conservative minister who, believe it or not, was in the governments of 3 Conservative prime ministers. And what a mix, Ted Heath, Margaret Thatcher and David Cameron, so congratulations. He's our counterweight to Philip Murphy, having been president of the Royal Commonwealth Society. Right. And also with his own new book just out, The Mother of All Networks, Britain and the Commonwealth in the 21st century. We then have Rita Payne, born in Assam and a former top BBC producer whose knowledge and network on the Commonwealth and much else as well surpasses anything I've ever come across. Thank you, Rita, for all your help over the last year. A middle-of-the-road voice, I think, deeply involved in the Commonwealth and the former president and still the organizer of the Commonwealth Journalists Association. And then Salil Tripathi, a London-based journalist and commentator whose views were summed up by an article he wrote for the Australian Griffith Review on the future of the Commonwealth that appeared in The Guardian, headlined, "Empire Strikes Back, Why Former Colonies Don't Need Britain After Brexit," which more or less sums up, with a view of either do need or don't need, what we're going to be talking about. Philip, we sat in this hall on April the 19th, the opening day of CHOGM, you on the stage, me in the audience, for the launch of your book. And I thought that you were very low-key. Well, it wasn't the launch, you just told me. It was a session on the Commonwealth. I thought you were very low-key, almost disowning the blurb that had been put out by your publishers. In fact, you said to me afterwards that the blurb exaggerated what you had written. So I did some word searching on the PDF copy of it. I mean, the great thing about books in PDF is you can instantly search words and discover what people are saying. And I discovered that Mirage is there, Emperor's Clothes is there, Irrelevant was said by a TV reporter, Gilded does not appear, it says Gilded Self-Image is not there, Irrelevant is. But then I went to the book itself and I found what I think is the best insult in the book. In the light of all that he's just written, the Commonwealth is the international relations equivalent of a homeopathic remedy. It is based on the prospect offered by charlatans and quacks throughout the ages, that of something for nothing. Philip, tell us about your book.
Thank you, John. There was one thing that I did try and quibble with over the flyer, which was Imperial Nostalgia, and I find it, I don't find it a very useful term, although, you know, you can certainly see, you could certainly read Commonwealth as an exercise in Imperial Nostalgia. I mean, I think the point I was wanting to make, and you said that I was actually being quite constructive in the discussion.
I think muted. I didn't say constructive.
No, I think constructive rather than muted.
Because of the week.
I'm essentially a good boy. I mean, I'm very restrained in a sort of British way. I don't like to cause a fuss, and it's just a mark of how frustrated I think I've been dealing with the Commonwealth over the last 10 years. That the book is rather vitriolic in places. And it was written in the wake of Brexit, in the immediate wake of the vote. And the Commonwealth just seemed to me that another form of magical thinking by the sorts of people who'd led the debate in Brexit. That this amorphous thing could be any sort of substitute for the decades of hard work and hard negotiations that had gone into the EU, which, like it or loathe it, had created something solid and important. And that was, I think, where the anger was. I mean, the other thing is that I think within the Commonwealth, a historian is a deeply threatening thing. Not just because they remind the Commonwealth that they are, in a sense, an imperial legacy. There's no getting away from that. Any story about the Commonwealth begins, in the beginning was an empire. It's even having a historical memory of 20 years. It's a bit like someone coming up to me and saying, this new person has been appointed Vice-Chancellor of whatever. They promised to do the most wonderful things, to fix the finances, to raise the student intake, raise standards. And I say, oh, I've known that person. I worked with them for about 15 years. And they were pretty lazy and didn't do anything. And they got their fingers burnt a few times. And really lucky to come away with it with keeping their job. And so I shouldn't put too much faith in their promises. And to that extent, I think a lot of what I say, because a lot of the book focuses on the last 10 years when I've been a sort of fly on the wall as director of the Institute of Commonwealth Studies. Actually, I think that's pretty uncontroversial. I think fans of the Commonwealth would also concede that within the last 20 years, the Commonwealth has performed very poorly. The question is this about a temporary problems, temporary poor leadership, or is there something structural, which means that whatever the Commonwealth achieved between the 1960s and the 1980s was more about the time, the specific nature of, you know, a kind of a more optimistic sense within developing nations, a very charismatic group of post-independence leaders, than the intrinsic strength of the Commonwealth itself. And I suppose my book is saying that I think the problems are structural rather than temporary ones.
Your choice of Vice-Chancellor as an example in the middle of it, of course, brings me directly to the fact that you're director.
Yeah.
You are director of the Institute of Commonwealth Studies at London University at SOAS, which I suppose...
Oh, no, it's the University of London, nothing to do with SOAS.
You're housed at SOAS, no?
No, we share a building with it. They've moved in. There's like a sort of... it's all very complicated.
So that makes you the top Commonwealth academic. So it's a bit strange for the guy who's at the head of the learning of the Commonwealth to produce this critique.
But we're not a Commonwealth fan club.
No.
And there were plenty of there were plenty of directors of institutes of Soviet studies in America, in Europe, who didn't sing the red flag to themselves in the shower every morning. The question, when I was recruited to be director in 2009, who do you recruit to be director of an Institute of Commonwealth Studies? I mean, you know who to recruit to an Institute of Philosophy or Institute of History. What the hell is Commonwealth Studies? It could be any number of different things. And I suppose, unlike the Commonwealth, we have focused on a couple of things very successfully. One is human rights and the other is history. And I'm a historian. And we are, we are one of 9 humanities institutes at the University of London School of Advanced Study. And the great advantage that we have is academic freedom. We can say what we believe to be true. And I believe everything in this book to be true.
But do you recognise, before I move on to David, do you recognise what I heard when I started talking to people, and most of my sources were other high commissioners in Delhi? The small countries do value what happened. Are you taking rather what in Delhi we would call as the Lutyens' Delhi view, the Lutyens' Delhi being the elite in the middle who think they know what's happening in the whole country, but all they know is what's happening in the bubble? Are you in fact a bubble? And you're not recognising what these smaller countries get in terms of, well, we'll go into that in more detail, but you're not recognising that, are you?
That's a very good question. I mean, I'm here, largely to plug my book, which is only £20, but there is a free resource which we have created, the Institute of Commonwealth Studies, which I think is a great achievement over the last 10 years, which is the Commonwealth Oral History Project, which we interviewed over 70 people, heads of state, foreign ministers from around the world, and said to them, what use do you find in the Commonwealth? And for almost everyone, there is some marginal value in belonging to the Commonwealth. There is no question about that. And, most of the interviews were done by my excellent colleague Sue Onslow. I did 1 or 2 in India, actually. One with 3 former Indian foreign secretaries. One, K. Shankar Bajpai. I said to him, well, what is the great achievement of the Commonwealth over the last 50 years? He said that it still exists. And he said, well, when you're a member of a club, why leave it?
He's over 90, this guy.
Yeah, and still sharp as a pin. Lots of, you may not have a good reason to leave a club. It doesn't mean that it's functioning particularly well.
David, your book is here, the collection of essays. I must just quote one line from Philip Murphy's book before I let you speak. In 2013, you published Old Links and New Ties, Power and Persuasion in an Age of Network. Philip says that when the book was published, church bells rang out across London. The capital's Commonwealth true believers finally had the sacred text they'd always wanted.
And I take
so,
that
as the author of the sacred text, would you briefly give some answers to that? Because you're the leading the opposition.
I don't call that an insult at all.
It is, and it was a
very nice compliment.
A compliment, an excellent book.
I think in a way, John, I'm slightly the wrong person to be here to debate with Philip, because most of his feelings, as he's admitted, arise from the Brexit incident. And I, of course, am not a Brexiteer. In fact, I voted to remain. I voted to remain because I do regard the European Union as absurdly out of date. It's a 20th century device of centralisation in a digital age, and it's all in tremendous troubles. As you know, you can read them every morning in the newspapers. But I thought that really Britain was immensely skilled in handling these sort of situations. We'd invested vast blood and sweat in the stability of Europe over hundreds of years, and we had a part to play from within in the reform of the European Union. Well, anyway, that hope went wrong, obviously, as you know, because there was a referendum and there were more people voting for exit or Brexit than stay. And I think Philip is quite right in sort of marking that that's the point where HMG and Whitehall and the great departments of state, which have been really pretty snooty about the Commonwealth for the last 40 years, indeed, back in 72, they more than snooty. They actually damaged many leading Commonwealth countries. That's the point where the mood changed rather suddenly after Brexit, and suddenly HMG was setting up new bodies. I think vast cabinet office team was produced. 6 people in the Foreign Office became 80 people in the Cabinet Office, and it coincided with the prospect of Britain being the host.
To be fair, to interrupt you, fair, that was to organise CHOGM. They were worried that if they didn't set up another organisation alongside the Commonwealth Secretariat, the whole event of the week would not take place. Yes, it wasn't the Commonwealth as a huge thing. It was the event in London.
Well, but these things go together, and on top of that, of course, remember that the CHOGM being in Britain was almost accidental and decided long before Brexit.
Yes.
So these coincidences come together, and there's no doubt that the HMG's view changed. But where I think I'm on a different planet from Philip altogether is that he is talking, and we're talking even now, about governments and black car Mercedes and flags and state gatherings and all that sort of thing. And the essence of the modern Commonwealth, and indeed the essence of the digital world we live in now, is that it is the vast bulk of the activities and the togetherness and the weaving together of the networks across the planet is sub-governmental, non-governmental, in the civil order, in the civic space, in the great power of markets, in business, in the professions and so on. And it is the fascinating feature of today's Commonwealth organisations. You can't subscribe, it's a bit like an iceberg, you can't see them above the water, but they are vast and spreading all the time. And networks have their own agenda. They don't wait for governments to announce measures. They get on with it. So they'll have the tying together of the legal professions, the architects' professions, the scientists, the doctors, the educational system. You have the Association of Commonwealth Universities linking up every morning with 530 universities across the Commonwealth. You have the Commonwealth of Learning linking through distance learning with 40 million people every week. You have a vast growth of links of all professional kinds. You have agricultural links and development links. You mentioned development. And that is what is actually happening. Now, if you just look at the government side, and if you just look at the things Philip's looking at, you don't see any of that. You don't see any of that at all. And yet that is the fantastic growth that makes the Commonwealth so ideally suited to this age when, frankly, governments everywhere are weaker and finding it much harder to push through measures because the people are empowered. There are 12 billion mobile telephones in the world. There are 4.5 billion iPads. Every morning there are 3.5 billion people going onto these machines, connecting up in a staggering way. And obviously the section, and it's not too sectional, but the section which is connected through common working language of English and through a number of common attitudes to organizations on the legal side, very important, common law, and common accounting standards and common, is particularly well suited to fit into this entirely new world. So whether you like it or not, and whether it can be rubbished or not, it is happening. It's happening at a vast speed, far faster than many of the media understand. I was struck, just to tell you this, last week I was in Beijing, and I went to see these people. They all call themselves major generals, who are the advisors to the Chinese government on everything. What did they say?
Shanghai Cooperation.
They said, we're building up Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Actually, it's meeting this weekend in Qingdao with the Russians, the Indians, Pakistanis, the Turkey and Iran invited, and of course, China at the center of it. So really just about 2/5 of the world's population, meeting far more important, I think some will realize, than the G7 shenanigans in Quebec, actually. But needless to say, the media completely ignore it, but that is the reality. What did these people say? They said, we would like to talk to the Commonwealth. That's what they said. We said, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, let's get together with the Commonwealth. I felt a bit embarrassed because I didn't quite know who they wanted to talk to. But that gives you an indication of that far below the surface of Philip's rather cutting and sometimes, of course, accurate analysis of governments treating each other badly. India and Pakistan are hardly speaking terms at all. Other countries are very far from being friendly. At the government level, far below this, the networking is going on. Everyone wants to connect up, everyone talks, and it's happening every day on the press of a button. The digital revolution has changed everything.
And that's a connecting
changed
up,
everything.
And that's a connecting up that India, I don't know if the High Commissioner will speak on this, I'll speak for India on this. That is a connecting up that India doesn't want, because the attraction of the Commonwealth for India, apart from being able to spread its influence among the smaller states and in Africa where it's doing development work, its background and primary interest is it thought until just now that China wouldn't be able to invade. And all the other things that India belongs to, China somehow comes in.
No, well,
they thought on this one that China actually wouldn't.
Let me just
and I think it would be unfair to ask the High Commissioner what he thinks about China coming in. We'll ask Rita instead. Rita,
I'd be happy to take this.
You're wrong about
right, okay.
You're wrong about India. I'll explain why in a moment.
No, India does want...
No, I promise you, I haven't got it quite right. It's changed. It's changed. You're out of date.
No, I'm not. I was there last week. I've lived there 25 years. India's interest is partly that it is an organization where China has not got representation and looked unlikely to get observer status or anything else.
John, I think we are jumping the gun here. For one,
we are, yes, we are.
One, the SCO and Commonwealth haven't linked up. And India is the common factor, members of both the SCO and the Commonwealth.
Indeed.
But why should we see this as a zero-sum game, India versus China? It isn't. I mean, people write about how India suddenly rediscovered the Commonwealth because China is not there. But China was never there. So why didn't India rediscover it earlier? I think it's, I personally feel it's, I think people are reading far too much into this. I think India is a member of many organizations. Yeah. We've recently joined the SCO, and someone told me that somebody tweeted that India should join the G7. But,
absolutely, make it G8.
But be that as it may, I think we are not exclusivist. We certainly are, we are members of many organizations, and we don't want to keep people in or out. It's the membership to decide. I mean, the Commonwealth is expanding. It has expanded, and I'm not going to comment on whether country A, B, or C should be part of it or not. It's the membership that has to decide.
Rita, I'm moving on to another subject. Rita, at Paul's book launch during CHOGM, Paul Boateng, if I'm pronouncing his name right, Lord Paul Boateng, the former Labour government minister and former High Commissioner to South Africa, called the Commonwealth in constructive terms. He was the most positive speaker, I think, on the platform at that book event. Called the Commonwealth an actual family with a royal family at its heart. It wouldn't survive, he said, it wouldn't survive without the royal family because, and the reason he gave, though obviously there's more than this, was that royals could speak to heads of governments like no one else can, which is probably true. But do you think, as a question, that it wouldn't survive without the royal family? Is it a family with the royal family at its heart? How important is that? And that comes on to Prince Charles's role when he takes over.
Well, at the moment, I would say that the present Queen, it's not because of the monarchy or Britain. She personally has proved to be the glue that holds the Commonwealth together, especially for the British public. I don't think the ordinary British citizen knows a lot, cares a lot of the Commonwealth. But whenever the Queen gives a speech, her annual speech, then she will always talk about the Commonwealth, and she's the one who venerates it. And the last London Chogam, I think, was in 1977, and there was a long gap, and then we had this Chogam in the UK, and the Queen pulled out all the stops. We had all the glamour, the pomp, and she opened her doors to Buckingham Palace and Windsor. And as far as pageantry went, you couldn't surpass that. I mean, I was fortunate enough to be at Buckingham Palace, and you were there, of course. And, to see all the heads of state, all their representatives, just walk in one by one, stand shoulder to shoulder. And you had Trudeau, and then you had someone from a small, tiny country like, no one would know, an Asia-Pacific country, the Solomon Islands. And they all arrived. And then I thought, what made them all turn up? No one forced them to be there. No one has forced them to be members. So although I agree that it's a legacy of empire, it may have passed, it's nothing you can show that it actually does, I can talk later about my own experiences of what you've said, the soft power, the networking. If you had a Commonwealth gathering like this, in the audience, you would have someone from Tuvalu sitting next to the Solomon Islands, sitting to New Zealand, to Kenya, to Uganda. That's probably the only place that people would actually meet each other. I don't know how many people in the audience here would have met or know well anyone from the tiny countries that we mentioned, South Pacific countries. I'd be interested if you show hands. Have you met anyone to Tuvalu or any other countries which actually might even disappear?
The World Cup will do that as well.
Yes. I'm not saying it's the only one, but that is a platform. I mean, I can say more, but that's my thinking. So for the moment, yes, the Queen is holding the place together until something else comes and, we can think of an alternative. This one might have been a time for maybe Narendra Modi to take a front seat, maybe the head, but there didn't seem to be much of a push for that. Could have been maybe because people didn't want to be churlish and they agreed that although they were not monarchists, they didn't want to reject Prince Charles. But it seems very clear that this is the last. After Prince Charles, the Commonwealth will have to get its act together and think of an alternative head.
Can I just very briefly, you know that it's not institutionalized in the monarchy. The heads actually choose who the head of the Commonwealth is, and they did that. Obviously, they thought that His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, would be the very appropriate next head of the Commonwealth. But this, we must acknowledge here the wonderful work done by Her Majesty the Queen, her dedication, the way she has led the Commonwealth right from the day she took over. I think today is an appropriate occasion. It's her official birthday.
At the final press conference, Theresa May, the platform was asked about the choice of Prince Charles. I forget who it was, the President or Prime Minister of Nigeria, one of them, said it was a majority, which immediately led to the next question, well, was it, who didn't want it?
Who was against?
And Theresa May said it was unanimous. And anybody who's covered political meetings knows that unanimous does not mean that everybody agreed. It means that they all, at the end, said, oh, okay, in order to present a unanimous thing. So there were some people who didn't agree. But Salil, thanks for waiting so long.
It's okay.
You wrote in that article that I mentioned, like a divorcee on the rebound, Britain is now desperately seeking to woo its old flame, the Commonwealth, even as its 51 other member states are not exactly sure what Britain wants and whether Britain is what they need. I think it's a bit unfair, but tell us.
No, it's fair, I think, anyway. But that said, I think what I was getting at, probably it's prompted by the kind of thinking Philip had when he wrote something much more monumental, a book on the topic, and the timing of it, which was around Brexit. And I think I was amused, to put it mildly, when Boris Johnson and others started talking about, okay, EU is gone, doesn't matter, single market. We have the Commonwealth. We can go back to the days when we used to trade on equal terms. I think that was one of the terms he used. And anybody who has looked at even a bit of the history of the colonial empire, and Shashi Tharoor is talking this building, and he can tell far more eloquently than I can on that topic, but knows that, it was anything but equal terms. It was, yes, private enterprise, but of the monopolistic kind, which created the empire the way it did. And to think that those kinds of terms of trade are even possible, maybe Donald Trump fantasizes about those kinds of terms of trade these days. But otherwise, given WTO and given everything else we have, it's not going to happen. Singapore has a bigger per capita income. China is a market everybody wants. India wants other things from the Commonwealth. It wants easier access for people to come and go. That's the elephant in the room we are not talking about, which is people-to-people contact. It's wonderful to talk about online access, but how many people, other than the ABC plus New Zealand countries, can enter into another Commonwealth country without a visa? And you can't. For an Indian student, anybody who wants to come to Britain, they have to go through a humiliating process often to come into the country. Right?
That's all right.
And it's not just about India. And if you're Pakistan, it's a kind of intersectionality, because on top of that you're a Muslim, which makes it even harder to get into certain countries. So in that kind of a context, you think of a people-to-people solidarity or people-to-people relationships to be built. And yes, it's all very well to talk about the railways and the cricket, which I must admit, Ashish Nandi very famously said, is an Indian game accidentally discovered by the British. So we should never, ever forget that. That said, again, but in that kind of a context we live. And so to think that Commonwealth somehow solves certain problems that Britain currently has politically is an issue. Commonwealth can do huge amounts of very important work on human rights, which Philip has talked about a little bit. I think there are laws on the statute books of many Commonwealth countries, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Singapore, Malaysia, which are an embarrassment for democracies, such as 377 of the Indian Penal Code, which criminalizes same-sex relationships, such as the laws on sedition, such as the laws on assembly of more than 5 people at a place, on free speech restrictions, all, again, the gift of the Raj from Macaulay through the Indian Penal Code. But those laws exist. Now, if there is a way in which those who care within the Commonwealth for human rights were able to link up with those civil society organizations and build a truly democratic, liberal democratic structure within all Commonwealth countries and building people-to-people links, I'll be a fan, but we aren't there.
Theresa May, at the beginning, at the first press at the opening of the of CHOGM, and then in the final press conference, talked about the need to eliminate old colonial laws that banned same-sex relationships.
Well said.
And nothing happened.
Yes.
She made it as a statement as a firm thing at the beginning, and she mentioned it at the end, and nothing happened in between the two. Obviously, because 37 countries, or somebody on TV last night said 38, ban homosexual relationships, including India. And it would not have been very popular or very easy to have had that debated. Interestingly, on, I can't remember what it's called, the 10:30 BBC Two news thing, Elton John last night said that he hopes that when Prince Charles becomes head of the Commonwealth, he'll begin to change that, and believes that Prince Harry, as the emissary to the Commonwealth, I think he now is, those two brothers might begin to move that forward. But on the human rights, I mean, I'm coming back to you. Yeah. On the human rights, it is obviously something that many countries, including India, on other human rights issues, wouldn't want to have discussed.
You're right, that India would not probably want to be talked to by Commonwealth governments or even by Commonwealth-based human rights organizations. But India is going through the transformation. The Supreme Court is hearing the case. And my hope is that the Supreme Court will undo the damage done by the judgment of 2013 and uphold the judgment of Justice Shah and Muralidhar on the 377 issue. And I think the change has to come from within. If it's imposed, it won't work. But having said that, to build that and to let that happen, the solidarities that can be built with people who work on similar issues elsewhere in the Commonwealth, and I don't mean, again, Australia, Britain, Canada, and New Zealand, but the Ugandan same-sex activists, for example, people like Frank Mugisha, and people like that, if they were to form a partnership, that would be wonderful.
And then the other area of human rights or freedom of expression, Rita, which did not get discussed during CHOGM, was the Commonwealth Journalists Association principles that were produced just before it. You couldn't get access into the machinery. And again, that's something that India, in the current mood in the country, would not want discussed.
So there are...
And other countries too. I'm not just naming India, but several countries would not want that discussed. But just briefly tell us about the journalists thing that could not get into the agenda.
Yeah, well, The Commonwealth Journalists Association, and like other associations that Philip has already mentioned in his book, we don't have a budget. But what we have been able to do is, in whatever we can, draw attention to the abuse of human rights in so many Commonwealth countries. And if we just look recently, we know that during the Chogam in Sri Lanka, one of the reasons we didn't go is there were so many journalists killed there. We had Lasantha Vikramatunga who'd been killed there. We've got more recently the blogger in Malta who's been killed. And so we got together, and two of my colleagues, who I wish were here, have worked with other Commonwealth organizations, draw up principles in which the judiciary and all the arms of government could work together with the media to promote good governance and promote media freedom. We worked on this. Sadly, this wasn't picked up in the communique. And as you have mentioned in your book, there are all these worthy statements, all the civil society organizations do a lot of work, but nothing gets into the communique, and even if it does, that's where it stops. And that is the problem. We've got civil society which are active, do research, and do excellent work, but how do you translate into action?
Before we go on to trade, which I want to do in a moment,
Yeah.
David, Chogam, on the human rights issue still, gets itself into unnecessary knots. I mean, it went to Sri Lanka at the time of the Tamil troubles there.
Yes.
And now, unbelievably, decided at this Chogam that the next one will be at Rwanda. I mean, Rwanda?
Well, originally
who's going to go?
Originally it was Malaysia. I think quite a lot of people will go. It's a very bright, now, incredibly, despite its horrific past, it's a very sparky and lively place. I feel a lot of people...
You think it's a safe choice?
I think you shouldn't take a superior view about Rwanda. It's one of the miracles of Africa, and, you know, if more miracles of that kind happen, Africa will really make it...
And you think it's a safe choice? You don't think there's a risk on the human rights front?
Well, there's always a risk on the human rights. Countries want to look after their own human rights. They tolerate only to a limited degree other people poking their nose in and saying, we don't like the way, we're so marvellous, we don't like the way you're behaving. It doesn't work like that.
Can I just add
India's got its own pride and must
I think
look
I
after its own
completely
affairs.
agree with David here, because, and Salil, I mean, you talked about important issues, but it has to come from within, and we are doing it. You referred to the Supreme Court of India.
Yeah, that's right.
We are the largest democracy in the world. We have problems. Everyone has problems, but we address them ourselves. We don't need the Commonwealth, or for in fact by any other organization, to tell us what we should or we should not do. And Rita, I mean, as far as the communique is concerned, I mean, obviously there are, what, 76 Commonwealth organizations? Yeah. Each one of them wanted something to be put in the communique. Your point is very valid, and I think it's what you had brought up is very important, but obviously not everything can come out. It's a question of priority. 2 square meals a day or something else. Combating malaria or something else. Climate change or something else. So there's a conflict, not conflicting, but a huge number of priorities, and you can't expect one Chogam to include everything. You'd have a 500-page document and still not address everything.
I agree with you completely on that. You can't, answer everyone's needs. But 57 journalists were killed in the last 5 years in Commonwealth countries, which is quite chilling.
And that should have undoubtedly been tackled, I agree with you.
Yeah.
Philip, let's move on to trade. There was a dream, I think, just after Brexit, or just before Brexit, that the Commonwealth could become a trade bloc, which was clearly not a runner and should never have been mentioned. And there's a senior bureaucrat somewhere hiding in Whitehall who should get the sack for inventing the phrase Empire.2 to describe what the Britain's ambitions were. I mean, the guy should be sent to the equivalent of a salt mine for the rest of his career because of the damage he did for the damage that he did to the debate about the future of the Commonwealth. But put your constructive hat on, which I'm sure you can. How would you see the Commonwealth developing on the trade front? We know what it hasn't done. There's a lot of intra-trade, but not as much as there might be. What would you like to see the Commonwealth do on trade?
Well, what the Commonwealth was saying to Britain over Brexit was don't leave the EU. It's very rare that the Commonwealth speaks with one voice, but unusually that's what they said.
Commonwealth countries don't like being told what to do.
Almost unanimously, because they're, a lot of Commonwealth countries are heavily reliant on trade with the EU. they don't want the EU economy to be damaged by Britain acting foolishly. What I would say is that, of course, the problem is that supporters of the Commonwealth who are pro-Brexit, which I recognise that Lord Howell isn't, tend to say, though, these great expanding markets in Asia, the Commonwealth is the way in, which ignores, the fact that many of those markets are outside the Commonwealth, but B, of course, Britain needs to engage with India. India is going to be one of the it's going to be one of the superpowers of the 21st century. It's going to be one of the economic superpowers. The question is, do you go in waving the Commonwealth flag as a British businessman? And I would say you don't. It doesn't open any doors for you. I think, as the High Commissioner has said himself, India has been rather cautious and standoffish about the Commonwealth for a very long time. And indeed, India creates the modern Commonwealth by remaining as a member, as a republic, and agreeing that deal in London in April 1949, which means that in 1950, the Commonwealth consists of 500 million people, 360 million of whom are living in India, another 40 million living in Pakistan. But Nehru is quite determined that India will follow its own course. So it means, India's membership means that the Commonwealth will be a huge organization, largely, whose population are largely based in the developing world. That is useful, but they are determined to follow their own courses. And the idea of some kind of Commonwealth free trade zone, it completely ignores the fact that Commonwealth countries have widely diverging interests and policies when it comes to trade, when it comes to foreign policy,
When, one of the issues has been decentralising the organisation. Very briefly, because we're going to open it up at the audience and we're running out of time. I saw in your book that the idea of India, of the headquarters being moved to India, was mooted years ago.
It's been periodically. Periodically pointed out that India, should be the hub of the Commonwealth as its largest member. But there's never really been much of a desire amongst the sort of the Indian government to take that role.
Okay, yeah. David, briefly before
I think we've got to understand that modern trade, first of all, it's going through a complete revolution. The nature of trade is changing because the nature of production is changing, and the pattern of flows and global supply chains is like nothing that existed in history. Secondly, it's worth noting that although the figures today are pretty bad, quite very minuscule indeed, as Philip says in his book, we're looking at the biggest expansion in middle-class consumer markets in history when we look at Asia and Africa and Latin America. That is what we're looking at. All the estimates, and I know these forecasts are nearly always wrong, but they say all the economic growth, or 80% of it over the next 10 years, is going to be outside the OECD, and certainly outside Europe, and to some extent outside America. This is where, obviously, the markets of the future are developing now, even while we're sitting here. So I think if one's thinking about tomorrow rather than today, you do have to understand that it's the trade opportunities and the market opportunities are in that direction. Second, people think of trade as just a question of putting containers on ships and shipping along. That's not trade anymore. The vast bulk of trade is data transmission, knowledge products, and services. That is growing very fast. We, of course, the British are 80% service economy, and we are understandably interested in this growth. And it's not just about business, because the context in which the business happens or doesn't happen itself is very important. If you have the right educational links, if you have the right school links, if you have the right legal links, if you have the right background in a whole variety of literary and cultural ways, you are setting the scene for trade expansion. If you don't have that, and you just go in and say, buy my beads, buy my aircraft, you'll quite often get a snub, just as the British certainly found when they tried to say, let's go to India and sell them a lot of things. Rightly, they got a nasty snub, because everyone said, in that case, will you kindly stop being so poisonous about visas over our students? What are you doing to us? Yeah. And so the whole thing came to a sickening halt. It's a good example of HMG thinking, oh, tomorrow's new new markets, off we go, and realizing it's not like that at all. You don't need to wave any flags. I don't agree with Paul there. You don't need to wave any flags. You just need to pick up on the facts that these are the great consumer markets of the future, and that when it comes to the legal and commercial niceties, even the sense of humor in the DNA, in the language, you are dealing with people who are not necessarily distant foreigners, but are basically friends.
And the Theresa May visit to Delhi and the last Modi visit to London did not produce the deals that they'd hoped to because of the visa issue.
No, it didn't.
We're opening it up.
It didn't, you're quite right.
Somebody
right.
back there and then down here. No, there's a back and then in the front row.
Is it me or someone?
The front row? Sorry, that's back. That one.
Okay. Firstly, thank you for the talk. It's very interesting. I guess my question is, thinking back to other trading blocs or other organizations countries have been members of, you have UN, you have ASEAN, you have NATO, all of these different, and EU of course, all of these organizations, countries are members of because of common interests. And it's something that you mentioned about Commonwealth countries having diverging interests. So when we think back to the philosophy of why these countries are a member of Commonwealth, they're actually united by something which is not necessarily always positive in their history. And I wonder if the reason why it hasn't been successful and may suffer in the future is the reason why they're a member of. So just going back to the philosophy of what it means to be part of the Commonwealth.
Who'd like to take that?
Should I take that?
You go first. I didn't really hear it.
I mean, it's a very, very good question. I think it comes down to a problem that the Commonwealth has had in the last 25 years, in which it's sort of, with the end of the Cold War, the end of white rule in South Africa, it really had to redefine what it was for. And so it said it's about shared values. The problem is it doesn't really share values. I mean, it shares a history. And in a sense, one thing that we haven't really talked about in the session is the kind of legacy of colonialism, which is a very hot topic, an increasingly hot topic, more so than I think I expected it would be when I began my training as a historian of empire in the 1980s. And in a sense, the Commonwealth is a perfect vehicle to have those sorts of debates. You know, we're talking about how the legacy of anti-homosexuality legislation, talking about the whole idea of human rights and things we share. But the Commonwealth is terrified to have that debate because it wants to present itself as this fresh, new organization which it has very little to do with history. It's just that its members, you know, are all of one mind, which is nonsense. I think it's missing a huge opportunity.
One here.
Hello. This is not working.
If you want to say who you'd like the answer from, please say so.
Yeah, this is a suggestion that I'm looking to feed to 8 billion people, and if someone here can help me, I'll be very grateful. If we could just work on a common thing, which is to feed 8 billion people.
What was he saying?
One back there.
I agree with you.
Okay, first of all, I must say that I'm delighted to be here, and thank you so much for a very good session on the Commonwealth of Nations. I have this question for Honourable High Commissioner Y.K.Sinha. And you know, from the conversation you're having about how India needn't be told from outside what to do, it reminds me of the Abbasid Caliphate, when the translation movement was on, when it was posed to the Caliph saying that this is un-Islamic knowledge, why should the Greek knowledge be translated to Arabic? The Caliph said, and that is how he supported it, by saying, the truth is truth, whatever language it is in, it doesn't matter. So my question is, why is India so touchy about being prodded or suggested from outside for any truth that should be followed by India?
I didn't say that India shouldn't be told. I'm saying that an organization like the Commonwealth shouldn't be telling its member states this is good and this is bad. The member states themselves should realize what is good and what is bad. And in any case, we were talking in the context of something that Salil had raised. And we in India, we have a very free society. We have people writing all the time, telling governments to do, what not to do, etc. And if there are people from outside who want to write in Indian papers and tell us what to do, very welcome. John does it all the time. But, for the Commonwealth as an organization, or for the matter any other organization, to preach, the problem, in my opinion, is with these organizations, and particularly the Commonwealth, and I alluded to that, is that it's seen that 3, 4, 5 countries set the agenda and then preach to the rest. That is the problem. So if you address that problem, I'm not talking about India being closed to suggestions from people, not at all. I said it in a completely different context.
But India didn't complain when Pakistan was told that democracy was a good thing and dictatorship was a bad thing, and therefore get out of the Commonwealth.
Well, India is a democracy. How can India complain? India is a democracy. No, Why would India complain?
You stood there and supported the decision that Pakistan should be thrown out. So you were telling Pakistan, get rid of your dictator.
Then you have a CMAG that decides. You have a CMAG, you have a Commonwealth, that decides the principle. There's a Latimer House principles. Countries who don't follow it, then they have a problem. But that is all the member states get together to decide, not you and me.
I couldn't resist.
That's okay.
I have a question for Lord Howell. You talked about the role of HMG in trade discussions. Sorry, you can't hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. You talked about the role of HMG in trade discussions and the fact that they assumed things and it wasn't realistic. Yeah. But what can politicians do in this country, recognizing that problem and yet having to face the constituency of Brexiteers? And never mind their attitude to Europe, what about beyond?
Well, what can politicians do? It's, quite a lot of people think not very much. But the answer is at 2 levels. One, the leadership of politicians, and good politicians, must be that they must set out the narrative of where the world is going, and maybe standing on the shoulders of the past, just see a little further ahead in an extremely dangerous and worried world at present. And that's what politicians should do when they're talking about the sort of things that are represented by the Commonwealth network. It's not the only network in the world, there are many others, but it is obviously one of, with all sorts of currents are running, weaving it all together. So at the level, general level, the narrative, and at the much more detailed level, removing the obstacles to the energies and activities of the non-governmental bodies, which are increasingly driving these, the togetherness and the interweaving of Commonwealth countries and their neighbours. So it's at 2 levels. In between, I think, is an area of people saying, what can the government do? What sort of measures can they switch on to make everything wonderful tomorrow morning? I think that's for the birds. I don't think that Commonwealth to do that very much. And there's the trouble with our Choggam we just had. It was a great occasion, but there were many, many non-governmental activities going on all around it which didn't get reported, and everyone thought it's all about governments. It's not all about governments. It's not even all about politicians. It's about connectivity, I do tell you, and it's linking up every school, every university, every profession, every organisation across the whole planet on a scale that no one has really grasped. There are a quadrillion exchanges on the network every day. If you put them on discs, I read in the Financial Times, the disc would be piled 5 times as high as the Eiffel Tower on one day. This is communication going on a scale never before seen, and a lot of it in English. Not that we're clever, we didn't achieve that, but that's what happened. English has become the protocol of the planet, pushing out Mandarin, Chinese, and even Spanish.
And Hindi.
And that's it. That's what's happening. That's what's happening.
A very quick question.
What I want to ask is that how do the countries like Britain, Australia, and Canadian citizens, so not the governments, they perceive the Commonwealth as? I mean, if you look at the European Union, the EU is a discussed topic among the EU, the public, if you like. But I get the feeling the Commonwealth is just a very government-level organization and people really don't care. Is that a fair observation?
Philip?
I don't think it has a great deal of visibility. I mean, I don't think it really played directly as an issue in the Brexit vote. I mean, I think it was immigration that swung it. It's very difficult to. I mean, it's not just Britain and the rest of Australia, New Zealand. And this is a problem with Lord Howell's argument about these great networks. Shortly after I took over, I was rung up by a young man who said that he ran an organization that represented 1 billion young people. And I hadn't heard of this organization, and I wondered how many of those 1 billion young people had heard of it as well. The problem with the network is you've kind of got to know you belong to it, which is a problem that the Commonwealth has, certainly in terms of recognition.
Rita, last word?
Just very quickly, all I want to say is, if one had to put another title next to Commonwealth, you could say great aspirations or great expectations. But some things which are valuable, which I found at the last CHOGM, is, say, the adoption of the Blue Charter. And then we had a panel, including the Foreign Minister of Vanuatu, and who really told us how pollution and marine pollution is destroying the country. Everything they're eating is plastic. Everything they're growing has got plastic. And these sort of things need to be highlighted, and these small countries were able to highlight it, and this is what made us all aware of what is happening to the environment at the moment. And that is important, that we should all be aware, and that might be translated to policy.
I'm glad you brought that up, because it's something we didn't get into, which was undoubtedly something that did come out of CHOGM. Thank you all very much. Thank you.